Leviticus chapter 12. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, according to the days of the separation, for her infirmity shall she be unclean. And the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised, and she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. But if she bear a maid child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her separation, and she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days. And when the days of her purifying are fulfilled, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon, or a turtle dove, for a sin offering, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, unto the priest, who shall offer it before the Lord, and make an atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the issue of her blood. This is the law for her that hath borne a male or a female. And if she be not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtles, or 2 young pigeons, the one for the burnt offering, and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for her, and she shall be clean. Attention among a lot of people for many, many, many years. And the thought is that the ritual laws of purity are entirely discriminatory, and that if a woman has a boy, her ritual period of uncleanness is 33 days, whereas if she has a girl, it's 66 days. Therefore, women are valued less or considered more unclean than men, etc., etc., etc. And none of that is true. We know that Heavenly Father loves every single one of His children. I have 4 daughters and 3 sons. And I love all of my children. I'm sure Heavenly Father loves all of His children, regardless of gender. That just happens to be a fact of life. I have 4 magnificent daughters and 3 wonderful sons, and I've often said that my sons make me proud, but my daughters make me feel humble. And I think that's the way it is for most fathers. At least most loving fathers, and there are some that aren't. But we have a kind, wise, loving Heavenly Father. And so the question really goes down to, are there any possible reasons for this within the culture? And would Heavenly Father have adjusted what He wanted done for the culture? We know, for instance, that even though Aaron was supposed to eat a particular sacrifice, a sin offering, the goat, that his 2 sons burned it all, and Moses was upset that it wasn't eaten according to the instructions, and Aaron said, in basis to him, look at my 2 oldest sons died today. Would me having eaten this really been a joyous acceptance unto the Lord of what this was all about? And having understood that, Moses accepted it, and God accepted it. Now, I suspect that the ritual cleansing period was twice as long for women, children, girls, than for boys, for a very specific reason that had nothing to do with any uncleanness or anything else that you would likely think about, but had more to do with the resources of the family to offer, or the woman, resources of the woman to offer the sacrifice. But let's go back, and we're going to deal with what the uncleanness meant first. Uncleanness in the sense that it applies here in everything to do with their cleansing laws or laws of cleanliness has less to do with something being filthy or disgusting or dirty than it has to do with it being the highest ritual purity for the performance of ordinances, where the quality and purity of the person participating in the ordinance is as far away from everything earthly as possible and as close to everything heavenly as possible, so that you are as close to the intention and spirit of the activity, the goal of the sacrifice, the goal of the worship as possible. And that is why anything related to bodily function, although perfectly normal and perfectly natural, was considered unclean because it was worldly and of this earth. Had to also understand why certain types of sexual things were considered unclean, and that's because in every single country, every single community surrounding these people, sexual activity was part of normal worship for these people. The sex act was part of their worship. Ritual prostitution was part of it. The sex act between husbands and wives in public was part of worship. And the Lord had to establish these people were being different. And so that's why there had to be a tremendous difference between these people and the people surrounding them. They had to set themselves apart as being vastly different than anybody else, and they had to see that and understand it. Now, I suspect in terms of the difference between the 33 days and the 66 days, and this is pure speculation on my part, but having tried to learn some of how Heavenly Father thinks over the years, I think there's value to it. And we see the parallels in our own society. I know from the time when my daughters were born, as joyous as people were for us to have our daughters, for the men who knew us, when the first son was born, there was a whole different level of camaraderie, of joy, of happiness, of sharing than there was when the girls were born. It was almost like this, I mean, we're talking now modern time. It was almost like when I had a daughter, it was like almost condolences. And I suspect in those days, when sons were the ones who inherited things, sons were the ones who did most of the heavy lifting and all the rest of this, and daughters, you sort of had to put together some money to get somebody to take them off your hands to marry them. Sons were looked forward to and were received in the community with a higher degree of acceptance. And I suspect maybe in the family there were gifts given to the father, to the family, that were not given when girls were born. And therefore, it might have represented a much higher challenge for a family to come up with a sacrifice for a girl who, although in Heavenly Father's eyes was worth at least as much as any young man, and who is valued by Heavenly Father and is treasured as much, and is probably more spiritual and more sacrificing, but that it would take longer for the family to come up with the resources to offer a sacrifice. And so, since the sacrifice did not have to be offered until her ritual time of purifying was over, she had twice as long to do that. Wouldn't that be a nice thing for a kind, wise, loving Heavenly Father to do? I think so.